She's just a homeless vet, Lena says, laughing, so the sound bounces off the oak walls and lands in my chest like a thrown coin. The Arlington County courtroom is bright and cold, the kind of light that keeps score and writes every breath into the record. Brian tilts his phone so the back row can admire the listing for my grandfather's house, the one with the blue door and the hydrangeas that refused to die even when the winters were unkind. My mother studies her lap like there is a map there that could lead her out of this day. My stepfather locks his arms across his chest and nods as if he is grading a test I did not know I was taking. The lawyer across the aisle smiles, a small professional smile, and says, "I have had a hard time since deployment." He calls it adjustment. He calls it mismanagement. He calls it unfortunate. He does not call it theft. I hear the small reactions behind me. The throat clears the chair legs, whispering on the floor, the little lives that think they are not part of this story. The bailiff watches the door. The judge, Honorable Eleanor Briggs, makes notes with a pen that does not hurry. Lena breathes in like she has been waiting to deliver her line for months. She says again that I am just a homeless vet, and the word just stings more than homeless because it tries to shrink a life into a sentence. I keep my eyes on the bench and not on my sister. I do not look at my mother. I do not look at the phone showing my house to strangers. I keep still. Stillness is not surrender. It is a tactic I learned in rooms much harsher than this. What no one in the second row knows is how many small doors my family closed before we got to this big one. The phone plan cut without warning, so my number lit up no service when I tried to call the VA clinic. The lock changed on the storage room that held my grandfather's medals and the shoebox with his letters. The water bill and the electric bill quietly moved into names that were not mine. At the front desk of my building, a polite notice said the guest with the duffel and the boots was not to be buzzed upstairs again. Nice words, hard edges. They posted a smile for the security camera and walked away with the keys. When I went to the county website, the record said a trust, held by my stepfather, had taken the property that my grandfather told me with a hand on my shoulder would always be my anchor. 8 weeks ago, a notary who should not have been working at all witnessed a signature that pretended to be mine. The line under my name was too smooth. The loops were too perfect. I know my own hand. I know my own weight on the page. I did not need a lab to tell me what I could feel in my teeth. My mother called it a misunderstanding. Lena called it necessary. Brian called it efficient. Carl called it family business and told me family stays quiet. Quiet is a word people love when the truth is not on their side. I did not raise my voice. I did something better. I placed one piece of paper on the edge of my folder and slid it forward until the corner caught the light. 1. That is all it takes. I say not loud and not soft, just enough to cross the air between me and the bench. Brian tries to lean farther back to show the back row the listing again, but the screen blacks out, and for a breath, he does not know why. He forgot that I learned how to pull power without noise. He forgot I learned that from the same house he is trying to sell. He forgot I know where the breakers are. The judge looks up. The pen stops. The room seems to lean. I can feel the old training move through my spine and settle me like sand in a jar. I remember the ordnance sheds and the briefings in rooms where the air did not move. I remember the slow way a decision becomes a line in ink and how a line in ink becomes the thing that walks you into a better day. Lena thinks the words homeless vet are a blade. She does not know that a blade can also be a mirror. If you hold it wrong, you only cut yourself. I hear the door open behind me. A shape in dress uniform stands at the threshold, a figure like a comma at the end of a sentence that is about to change meaning. The bailiff turns his head. The judge lifts a hand a fraction, and the air answers with silence. I do not turn to look. I already know what presence feels like when it carries weight. I have stood near it. I have reported to it. I have been sent by it. Before any of that can land, Lena laughs again and says, I have nothing. She says it with a bright certainty that would be impressive if it were not so small. I let her words pass by like weather. I think of the late notice on the family plan and how I called the carrier from a parking garage and ended every permission that had my name on it. I think of the fraud alert I placed on the bureau's the P.O. box key warm in my palm, the 2-step codes that now blink on my own phone and not on hers. I think of the escrow memo that said maintenance, and the wire memo that said consulting, and the way money leaves a scent even when it tries to wear a mask. I think of the hydrangeas, and the blue door, and the afternoon my grandfather taught me to write my name with slow care, because one day it would have to hold against weather. The judge nods toward me. "Counsel," she says, and then she looks at the bailiff. "Keep that door monitored." I set my hand on the single page I brought. My pulse steadies. If you have lived with toxic family and felt the sting of family betrayal, if you have watched strangers sell your story from the back row, stay with me. This is one of those revenge stories you do not forget, not because it is loud, but because it is precise. Lena draws a breath to speak again. I lift the page. The light catches. The room holds. And in that held breath, I know the day has already turned. September in Falls Church should have smelled like cut grass and the last warmth of summer, but when I stepped out of the rideshare on Meadowlark Drive, the air tasted like metal. The house where my grandfather taught me to read a map and fix a leaky faucet sat behind a new iron gate. The keypad blinked at me, waiting for a code I did not have. I tried the old sequence, the numbers he used for everything from his tool shed to his desktop lock. The gate stayed still. I pressed the call box button and waited for the soft click of a familiar voice. Instead, a guard from the neighborhood patrol answered and asked for my reason for entry. I told him my name and said I was there to check the property. He said the owners had submitted a no trespass request. The word owners hit harder than no trespass. I asked who filed it, and he said the family. He asked if I had identification. I handed him my VA card and veteran ID. He looked at them like they were fake coupons clipped from the back of a newspaper. He said the people inside did not authorize visits from me. My phone buzzed with an alert from the power company. The electric bill had changed account holders. A second alert from the water utility followed. Both notices showed new billing names. The email subject lines did not even bother with polite language. One said, "Change of responsibility." One said, "Welcome to your new service." My name was nowhere. The guard stepped aside and asked if I needed the number of the leasing company. I told him I did not. I walked back to the street and waited for the mail truck that always arrived before lunch. When the carrier pulled up, I waved and asked if there were packages for the Calhoun address. He checked the crate and said a parcel from the VA had been marked, "Return to sender." He had a few envelopes too, but those had already been scanned back as undeliverable. The VA always used certified mail for medical updates. Someone had told the system that I did not live here. The carrier apologized the way people do when they see something wrong, but cannot fix it. He drove away. I stood there with nothing in my hands and the guard watching from behind the gate. I wanted to go to the porch and smell the old wood trace the scar in the railing where my grandfather dropped a wrench, but the new cameras glowed red and felt like eyes. I walked to the coffee shop 2 blocks over and sat with my phone and the bitter drink that tasted like burnt pennies. I opened the county website and typed the parcel number for the house. The page loaded slowly, and then the words appeared. Reddick Family, LLC, a trust managed by my stepfather. The trust was an active refinance with a regional bank. I did not need a law degree to understand what that meant. If the refinance closed, the equity could be moved, borrowed against dissolved, or sold. A house can be stripped of history with nothing more than a signature and a wire. My grandfather's house was halfway to becoming someone else's investment property. I tried to breathe, but the room felt smaller than a barracks bunk. The injustice did not feel cinematic. It felt ordinary and sharp, the kind of betrayal that wears khakis and carries clipboards. I told myself to stay calm. Panic never saved anyone. Precision did. I logged into my bank app and saw recent inquiries that I did not authorize. I backed out, opened the credit bureau portals, and lifted the phone to my ear. The credit freeze took 20 minutes, one bureau at a time. Experian, Equifax, TransUnion. I answered the security questions, set the PINs, and confirmed that no new credit line could be opened under my name. It was a quiet move, invisible from the outside, but it sealed one door behind me. If someone wanted to build another trick on the ground of my identity, they would now hit a wall. I finished the last freeze and felt a small piece of space open in my chest. I walked back toward the house, not because I expected the gate to swing open, but because I needed to see it once more. On the sidewalk, the hydrangeas still fought for color, stubborn, as they always were. A breeze rattled the for sale sign. It had been angled to hide the old paint marks where my grandfather had screwed the flag holder. I wondered if the buyers would even notice it. I took a photo of the gate and the keypad and sent it to Ruth Clay, my attorney. She was in court that morning and did not answer, but I trusted she would call back. I crossed the street to the public library, sat at a computer, and pulled up the county clerk's land records. The main deed still listed the house under the trust, but an entry 8 weeks earlier caught my eye. A codicil adjusting the will, witnessed by a notary out of Richmond. The name looked familiar. I checked the state notary database. The commission had been suspended 3 months for improper witnessing. The codicil removed me from the line of inheritance. The signature that claimed to be mine was curved smoothly without the slight tremor in the final letter that my arm carried after the last deployment. I compared it side by side. Theirs looked like someone practiced it too many times in the quiet hours. Mine looked human. The pit of injustice grew heavier. Someone did not just change the locks or the utilities. Someone removed me from my own bloodline on paper. Someone erased me with ink. I stared at the codicil until the screen dimmed. A librarian tapped my shoulder to ask if I was all right. I said yes, because I did not know how to say no without falling apart. Before I left the computer, I downloaded the document and sent it to Ruth with one sentence. This signature is not mine. As I stepped outside, my phone buzzed. Lena had sent a message. You do not need to come back here. We have it handled. It was not anger that filled me. It was clarity. I looked at the house one more time and saw the windows, the yard, the little porch light. The house was still there, but the welcome was gone. Welcome home. No. I turned toward Crystal City and started walking. I had served in places where the ground moved under my feet and the air carried danger. I knew what it meant to lose territory inch by inch. I would not lose this one quietly. The first seed of injustice had been planted. Now it was time to document everything. Halloween dinner at my mother's house had once been a gentle thing. Pumpkins on the porch, chili on the stove, children running through leaves in plastic costumes that rustled like candy wrappers. That year, the porch light was bright, but the warmth was gone. I arrived with a store-bought pie because the kitchen was no longer a place I was invited to enter. Brian opened the door with a smile that did not show his teeth and stepped aside as if he were letting a stranger tour an open house. The dining room smelled of cinnamon and something burnt. Lena stood near the head of the table, her phone angled high so everyone could see the glowing screen. She tapped a photo of my grandfather's house with the hydrangeas trimmed and the blue door freshly painted. "Move in, ready." She read aloud, "No family drama." The words floated above the bowls and plates like a joke meant to land softly, but the air went still. A cousin gave a small, awkward laugh before swallowing it again. My mother sat at the far end, her napkin folded into a tiny square she kept turning over and over. She did not look up. Carl cleared his throat and asked if people were ready for grace, but no one bowed their head. It felt like the room knew this was not a night for blessings. We sat. I kept my back straight and my hands on my lap. Brian passed the bread and then the green beans, narrating small updates about the listing price and the market. Lena held the phone like a hostess showing off vacation photos. She scrolled through images of the house without my name on the record. Mom said nothing. Her eyes stayed on her plate. When dessert plates were cleared, Carl unfolded the dinner check and slid it toward me. "If you still have any pride left, you can cover this," he said. His voice carried the authority of someone who had already decided the verdict. I pulled my wallet and handed the server my card without a word. The server took it to the computer. The room waited. Seconds passed. The server returned and whispered something to Carl, who leaned back in his chair with satisfaction too quick to hide. Declined, he announced as if he were telling a crowd at a county fair that the strongman had failed to ring the bell. Lena gave a quiet, "Oh," and lifted her glass. "Maybe you should not be so dramatic about things you cannot afford," she said, smiling with her lips, but not her eyes. I did not flinch. I asked the server to split the check so no one else had to cover my part. She nodded with embarrassment that did not belong to me. I walked out into the cool night air. The leaves on the sidewalk crackled under my boots. The street lamps made little islands of light along the road. In the shadow of the maple trees, my phone vibrated. A notification from the bank said attempted withdrawal from the joint savings I once used to help my mother with medical copays. Lena had been the added user on that account. She must have forgotten I would get an alert. I looked at my phone for a long moment, then leaned against my car and dialed the fraud department. When the agent answered, I spoke with the calm tone of someone checking weather. I said I needed to revoke all permissions associated with the joint. I said the authorized user should be removed. I said the secondary card should be canceled and any pending transactions flagged. The agent asked if I wanted to file a formal fraud claim. I said yes. It took 15 minutes to close the gaps my family had used to make me look small. 15 minutes to put locks on doors they thought would stay open. When the call ended, I watched my breath rise in the night air like a ghost of the person I used to be. I had been the daughter who paid bills early, who sent groceries when my mother was sick, who bought school clothes for Lena's children. Loyalty does not mean what you think it means when the people receiving it do not believe they owe you anything in return. I walked back toward the house to say goodnight to my mother. Through the bay window, I saw the family moving plates, wiping counters, laughing at something on Brian's phone. The screen glowed with my declined transaction. He spun the phone so everyone could see. A cousin covered her mouth. Carl shook his head. I turned away and understood the door between us had closed long before the lock changed on the house in Falls Church. I got into my car and started the engine. As I pulled out of the driveway, Lena stepped outside with her phone held up like she was documenting a crime. "Avery, look over here," she said, her voice bright and sharp. She laughed as she captured me backing up her camera, following my headlights. I could hear her saying "unstable vet" to someone nearby. The video would end up in the family group chat, another piece of evidence for the story they were writing about me. I drove to the far corner of the parking lot and let the silence settle. My phone buzzed again. Another alert, another attempted transaction. Someone was trying to move money from the joint savings into a debit card registered to a prepaid account. The system flagged it. The night did not feel empty anymore. It felt instructional. I made another call. This time, I asked the bank to tag every transaction associated with the debit card and freeze any connected accounts until ownership could be confirmed. The agent asked if I wanted the file marked for investigation. I said yes. By the time I hung up, I had locked every window my family had been trying to pry open. I imagined Lena walking back inside telling everyone I was paranoid, unstable, dramatic. They would not see the payback because it happened quietly and within the rules. Simple steps, quiet steps, steps that matter. I sat in the dark for a while and watched the porch light turn off. The house stood there with its jack-o'-lantern glowing on the steps, but it no longer felt like home. My phone pinged with a message from an unknown number. "Looks like you broke again. You should stop making a scene." I deleted it. I breathed slow. The humiliation of dinner sat in my chest like a stone, but the stone did not crush me. It sharpened me. I looked out at the neighborhood and remembered the days when this family would have defended me without question. Those days were gone. I drove away without looking back. I knew where the lines were now. I knew how far they were willing to go, and I knew they had no idea what a focused mind could do with a little evidence, a little silence, and the right bank representative on the other end of the call. The morning after Halloween, I woke before the sun scraped over the rooftops of Crystal City. The night had been long and full of unfinished thoughts. I brewed weak coffee in the kitchenette of my small apartment and sat at the table with my laptop open. The screen glowed with the county file I had saved the day before. The forged codicil still sat there, my name written in a hand that did not belong to me. I sent a message to Ruth Clay, my attorney, and she called back within the hour. Her voice always sounded like steel wrapped in velvet. She asked me to walk her through everything again, and when I finished, she made a list. Richmond land records, escrow memo, notary file history. She said if the documents were real, they would match county scans and witness logs. If they were fake, there would be fingerprints everywhere. I thanked her, and she told me not to thank her yet. The work was just beginning. After the call ended, I stared out the window. The city outside was waking up, and people were walking dogs and jogging beside the park. Their lives looked uncomplicated from a distance. My phone buzzed. A text from Brian appeared with a meme of a trash can and the caption, "Thank you for your service." There was no punctuation, just that sentence, and the smirk of someone who believed he had already won. I did not reply. Silence can be a response, too. I deleted the message and called an old friend. Evan Cho had served with me in a unit that did not advertise its missions. He had a mind for numbers and patterns. After leaving active duty, he became a financial consultant and built systems that found missing dollars hiding in places no one checked. When he answered, I heard the soft clatter of a keyboard in the background. I told him what had happened, and he whistled softly. He asked for the documents and wire screenshots. I sent them over. While he worked, I drove to the post office and rented a P.O. box. The clerk handed me a small silver key and gave instructions for informed delivery, a service that lets you see every envelope and package before it arrives. I set it up immediately. If my family wanted my mail returned to sender, they would find it harder now. I returned home and sat on the couch with my laptop. Evan sent a message requesting a call. When I picked up, he told me to open the spreadsheet he shared. Lines of transactions scrolled across the screen. Maintenance fees, landscaping invoices, consulting charges, all billed to a company under Brian's name. The company had no website and no employees. It existed to move money, not to earn it. Evan highlighted a line labeled Care Fund. That was the fund my mother used for prescriptions and home repairs. I had contributed thousands over the years, handing her envelopes of cash and wiring money when her insurance dropped a claim. The Care Fund was draining into Brian's shell company. Evans said that if the house sold or refinanced through the LLC, the money trail could vanish. He asked if I had set up two-factor authentication across my financial accounts. I told him I had not done that yet. He told me to do it now. I spent the next hour locking every account and attaching authentication codes to my own devices. I changed passwords that had been the same for years. I listed every credit card and bank account in a document only I could open. I shifted important contacts to the P.O. box. By noon, the skeleton of a defense was standing. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was exact. I made lunch and stared at my phone, half expecting another message from Brian or Lena. When it did buzz later that afternoon, it was an alert from the SSA saying my address had been updated. That was confirmation that someone had tried to change my information without my authorization. I called the SSA hotline, reported the suspected identity misuse, and flagged the account. The agent said they would investigate. Small steps, but each one mattered. I printed copies of every alert and filed them in a folder with dates and times written neatly along the edges. Ruth called again as evening fell. She had filed a request for the escrow memo from the supposed sale of the house. She used neutral language and let the process work without emotion. Facts do not need tears to be powerful. I found myself thinking about my grandfather's voice, the steady way he taught me that every signature was a promise and every promise had a cost. My phone pinged with a new message, another meme, a picture of a cardboard sign that read, "Homeless please help." The caption said, "Maybe try this." The sender was Brian. He liked to hurt with jokes because jokes made him feel untouchable. I closed the message and saved it in a folder marked Family Evidence. I sent a copy to Ruth and Evan. I did not give Brian the dignity of a reply. Silence again. That night, Evan sent one more file, a scanned PDF of a power of attorney document. The signature looked smoother than my real one. The letters did not shake the way mine sometimes did after long drives or cold mornings. The witness name was the same suspended notary from Richmond. The POA gave permission to manage accounts I never approved. It was a tool someone had used to move money and make changes without my knowledge. I stared at the PDF until my eyes burned. Someone had taken pieces of my identity and rearranged them to suit their goal. But a forged signature is like a bad disguise. If you know what to look for, the seams show. I sent the document to Ruth and Evan. They both responded within minutes. Ruth said we would file a fraud affidavit and request a forensic signature exam. Evan said he would trace the money until the last dollar had nowhere to hide. I sat back on my couch and let the quiet fill the room. This was not over. The humiliation at dinner, the declined card, the mocking messages, all of it was noise meant to break me. But I had learned long ago that noise cannot hurt you if you listen for the signal beneath it. And the signal now was clear. Someone was afraid. Someone had left fingerprints. Someone forgot that every financial transaction is a trail that never really disappears. I turned off the lights and let the room go dark. In the silence, the tiny red light on the router blinked like a heartbeat. I felt the anger settle into something sharper. Not rage, precision. They wanted me quiet. They wanted me erased. They were about to learn how hard it is to erase someone who knows where the documents live. They did not stop at the table. The humiliation had been a public curtain call, but the real play was quieter and more poisonous. Within days, the whispers left the house and crawled into the places where people make judgments without knowing the facts. The church group where my mother had taught Sunday school started receiving notes from people who signed them as concerned friends. Word spread at the grocery store and in the hair salon that I was unstable, that I could not be trusted to manage money or property that I had episodes since deployment. People who had once waved at me on the sidewalk began to glance away. Lena forwarded the same rumor emails with an apostle-like zeal, and at night she composed messages to neighbors warning them to be careful about trespassers. She even sent a formal-sounding email to the land office, a short note that read as official as she could make it, saying that a person named Avery Calhoun had been causing disturbances on the property, and that the county should flag any activity until the family resolved its internal matters. The land office logged the email and attached it to the parcel where future clerks might read it and assume it had weight. Carl called it caution. Brian called it protection. I called it a campaign to make me appear dangerous to the people who could stop them from taking what they wanted. The next part was the kind of betrayal that makes you smell the metal of a ledger. I pulled up the bank transactions Ruth had asked me to gather and found transfers out of the care fund, money my mother had put away for repairs and prescriptions. Small amounts at first, a few hundred here and there, then larger sums that went to a company with Brian's name. There was a memo line on one payment that read, maintenance, and another that said consulting. I had stuffed envelopes under my grandmother's blanket and wired money when a copay was due. That was the money I thought had gone to my mother. Someone was siphoning it into a company that existed to hide movement. Carl had taken money that was meant for my mother's roof and used it to pay a contractor who was also listed as a vendor for Brian's business. It was diabolically ordinary. It was paperwork and small talk and a veneer of normalcy that made the theft feel legal, even when it was not. The smart part of the betrayal was the story they built about me. If they could make people believe I was precarious, then my claims might be dismissed as the cry of someone who could not manage their own affairs. The smear campaign had two functions. The first was to get people to look away. The second was to make the government think twice before pulling a title out from under a family dispute. That is why Lena's note to the land office mattered. That is why a meme about a trash can mattered. Character assassination is not always loud. Sometimes it arrives in polite emails and in the small decisions of neighbors who no longer trust you with their keys. I called Ruth and told her everything I had found. She did not flinch at the list of names or the invoices. Her voice remained deliberate and practical. "File an identity theft report," she said. "Get the FTC affidavit in place and notify the county clerk of potential deed fraud. Do not let them build a record of you as unstable when the real question is whether someone forged signatures to move assets." I spent the morning filling out forms, printing every screenshot of a wire, every purchase order, every meme, every message. Identity theft reports are paperwork heavy, and they feel ridiculous when you type the words of your own life into boxes labeled victim. Still, it was a step that moved a crime from private cruelty into the domain of public record. I filed the report and then drafted an FTC complaint with Ruth on the phone, guiding me through the proper language. The form asked for details, and I gave them dates and times and the names of accounts that received money. Ruth wrote a letter to the land office in neutral tones, citing the specific entries and requesting a hold on any transfer until forensic review could confirm the integrity of the signatures on the codicil and any power of attorney. The land office responded with the kind of bureaucratic acknowledgement that signals the beginning of a formal process. They would review the material. They would note potential fraud. It was not a court order, but it was a barrier. I felt both relief and rage because the barrier had been so small that I had to build it myself. While the land office moved cautiously, the men who stood to lose money began to do the things men do when their plans wobble. Carl made phone calls to contractors to hurry repairs on the house, as if quick progress could paper over a paused refinance. He attempted to pull more cash out of accounts in person. Brian called vendors and asked for faster invoices to keep the trail warm with movement. In small ways, they ratcheted the pressure on the financial plumbing so that a drip here would become a flood. That is when the escrow officer, who had been a blank line on a list of contacts, became a person with a pulse. He had been handed legal documents and told to sign and send. He liked the simplicity of process until the county inquiry arrived. Suddenly, the risk of liability made him lean toward caution. He began sending internal memos, brief notes that did not name anyone, but hinted at irregularities. I learned of his cooperation through an email Ruth forwarded that made it clear he had sat up in his office and read the file again. His language was careful and heavy with legalese, but the implication was unmistakable. Someone in the middle of the chain was nervous, and nervousness is a crack. The family could not unmake that crack by yelling louder. It was an escalated twist that felt like a breakthrough and a trap at the same time. In the evenings, the church group messages continued to arrive, but increasingly they included quieter voices, asking for clarification for documentation, asking if anyone had actually read the records. The neighbors who had been quick to believe a simple warning began in small ways to ask questions. That is how the world changes. The smear that once felt absolute begins to blur when people start to ask for proof. My mini payback had been mundane and tactical. The identity theft report and the FTC affidavit were not dramatic. They were forms on a screen. But they instituted a new record that shifted the narrative from rumor to investigation. When the escrow officer sent his memo to his manager, and when the county clerk marked the parcel with a note for forensic review, the campaign of character assassination lost some of its power. The people who relied on rumor now had to reckon with documents. There was a rhythm to it, like counting steps in a march. For every rumor raked across the table, a paper had to be filed. For every whisper about my stability, an affidavit had to be signed. That was not revenge in the way movies show revenge. It was methodical, and it was legal, and it was slow enough that the perpetrators did not feel the change until they tried to move money and the accounts refused to cooperate. In the quiet after the paperwork, I sat at my kitchen table and allowed myself a small, private acknowledgement. I was not winning because I wanted vengeance. I was winning because I could not accept being erased. The escalated twist of the escrow officer cooperating became the hinge for the next stage. The family had started a war of narrative, but the laws and the forms they forgot to consider would be the map I used to walk through them. Rain turned Crystal City into a mirror of blurred neon and wet pavement, and I walked through it like someone trying to remember the shape of her own shadow. I reached my car and sat behind the wheel, listening to the soft tap of water on metal until the world outside felt distant. Then my phone buzzed. The notification flashed with a bright red banner that did not care about dignity or history. My account had gone into overdraft. An autopay had hit a family plan phone bill that I had been paying for years without thinking. The number was not large, but the meaning was. It said they were still tied to me, still using the lines I had opened, still pulling from the account where I saved grocery money and deployment bonuses. I stared at the screen until the numbers blurred. For a moment, I felt the full weight of it. The humiliation, the exhaustion, the way betrayal becomes normal when you are tired. The rain made small rivers down the windshield. The phone rang again, and it was my mother. Her voice was small and tired, and full of the kind of pleading that makes a daughter feel older than she is. She did not ask how I was. She asked me to stop making noise. She said the family plan was temporary, and that I should not embarrass my sister. She said a quiet family was a good family, and that I should let the lawyers handle everything. She said, "Do not push this too far." I listened and felt something inside me go very still. When she asked me to keep the peace for the sake of the family, I heard something else. I heard her asking me to let myself disappear for them. Outside the window, red taillights glowed against puddles like fading embers. I reached for the small plastic case that held my medals and commendations. The metal caught a glint of streetlight. 20 years of service and sacrifice lived in that little case. I placed it on the passenger seat and looked at it the way someone studies an old photograph of herself. Outside the uniform, who was I? Without the oath and the missions and the long nights in tents or command centers, who did I become? A person without a home or a family? A person without a name on a deed? A person whose bank account could be drained by people laughing at her behind closed doors? The thought pressed on my ribs until breathing felt like labor. I looked at the corner of my dashboard where a small flash drive sat a beat up, black piece of plastic I had thrown there months ago when unpacking boxes. I picked it up and turned it over in my hand. It was the same flash drive I had taken from my desk drawer when clearing my apartment after deployment. I plugged it into my laptop and watched a directory open. Inside were scanned commendations, deployment letters, copies of award citations. One of them was redacted heavily, only a few lines visible, but I saw my name and a code name below it. Raven 6. I stared. Raven 6 had been a whisper in briefings, a shorthand inside the unit for someone who handled intelligence fusion during joint missions. It was not public. It was not something you could search online. It was something the right person would understand in an instant. The flash drive also held a screenshot someone had sent me months ago. It showed a wire from a contractor labeled as maintenance timestamped to the same week the notary who signed the codicil had changed status from active to suspended. That overlap was not coincidence. That overlap was intent. I leaned back in the seat and closed my eyes. The exhaustion was still there, but beneath it was a flicker of clarity. They had moved money and altered records during the same window. They had counted on no one putting the pieces together. The rain kept falling as if the city had decided to wash itself clean. I opened my banking app and scrolled to the settings menu. The first thing I did was cancel every auto pay tied to my bank accounts. The family plan for phones gone. The streaming accounts gone. The cloud service where Lena stored pictures gone. Every subscription that hung on my name like a hook I removed. I froze every card tied to a shared line and requested new numbers. I changed logins and turned on 2-factor authentication for everything. If they tried to use my accounts again, they would be met with walls. When I was done, the quiet inside the car felt earned. I looked at the commendation again and whispered the code name to myself. Raven 6. You cannot bully a ghost. The next morning, Ruth called with a strange note in her voice. The buyer for the house had contacted the land office after seeing the title was clouded. Title clouded means something is wrong, something legal, something dangerous for anyone who wants to take possession. The buyer had pulled out of escrow. The sale was effectively dead. The money that Lena and Brian and Carl had counted on was suddenly gone. The refinance they were trying to push through paused. The cash flow that was supposed to carry them through the next phase of their plan evaporated. The same people who had smirked at me over dinner were now scrambling to figure out why their accounts were not lining up. I imagined them checking balances, calling the bank, wondering why new buyers were walking away. They would not suspect me at first. They would blame market conditions or an overly cautious lender. The truth would take time to settle in. They were losing control, and they did not even understand how fast the ice was cracking beneath them. The deep night had been a dark tunnel, a place where I could have given up. The overdraft notice, the call from my mother, the sense of being erased, all of it was the shape of despair. But the flash drive, the code name, the wire screenshot, the canceled auto pays the title Cloud. Those were small acts of defiance that turned despair into strategy. I had been pushed until I bent, but I did not break. The tunnel was still dark, but I could see a curve in the distance. This was not the end. It was the turning. The chapel at Joint Base Meyer-Henderson Hall was quiet the morning I walked in. Not the kind of silence that feels empty, but the kind that holds its breath. The stained glass caught a slice of September light and laid it across the pews in long, warm lines, and I stood there with my hands in my pockets and felt the shape of a decision settle inside me. No more silence. No more shrinking to make room for people who built their lives out of my absence. I sat in the third pew, closed my eyes, and let the memory of my grandfather's voice settle in. Every lie leaves a trace. They thought I would stay quiet. They thought the humiliation would break me. But humiliation is fuel when you put it in the right engine. I opened my eyes, took a breath that felt like steel, and made a single word in my mind the first real boundary I had built since coming home. No. The word felt heavy and clean. When I walked out of the chapel, I drove straight to Ruth's office. She had papers ready on the table and a list of motions she could file if I agreed. I told her to file everything. She nodded, then called the clerk for the Arlington County Circuit Court. We submitted a motion requesting a forensic document examination on the codicil and the power of attorney. We asked for the notary discipline history and the full escrow memo. We requested a protective order on the assets pending review. The clerk stamped each document, and the sound of the stamp felt like a heartbeat. When you ask a court to examine handwriting, they do not take it lightly. It means someone might have been erased on paper. It means someone might have forged a family. The money angle was built into the motion as well. Ruth requested a forensic accounting on vendor payments listed as maintenance because the payee name matched a marketing LLC owned by Brian. If the court approved the review, the accounting firm would follow every wire and every invoice. It would no longer be my claim. It would be a legal investigation. I felt the same rising calm I used to feel before stepping into a briefing room overseas. Everything had a place. Everything had a purpose. Every action mattered. When the filing was complete, I stepped outside and sat on a bench in the sun. I opened my phone, went to the county website, and registered for a deed alert. It sends an automatic notification to a property owner when someone tries to make a change. Transfers liens, edits, anything. It takes 2 minutes to set up. It can kill a fraudulent move before it starts. No one knew I did it. They would not see the effect until they tried to move something behind my back. Mini payback can look like nothing from the outside, but it is the kind of nothing that changes everything. That afternoon, I met Evan at a coffee shop in Bailey's Crossroads. He carried his laptop like it was a piece of him. He had spent years in the same Intel world I had. He understood how to follow digital footprints the same way soldiers follow tire marks in sand. He opened his screen and began scrolling through the metadata he had pulled from emails. The coffee shop was full of normal people, having normal conversations, none of them realizing that the difference between a rumor and a felony could live in a single line of code. Evan turned his screen toward me. He had found something in one of the messages sent to a bank, an email requesting caution on my accounts because of a recent mental episode. The language was formal, almost rehearsed. The sender looked legitimate at first glance, but the email address buried beneath an alias led back to an IP routing through a home Wi-Fi. Brian had tried to impersonate a doctor to the bank. He had tried to poison the financial well with a lie. That was an escalated twist I had not expected. Ruth joined us at the table and read the email twice. She pushed her glasses up on her nose and said one sentence that snapped the air tight. That is fraud and attempted identity misrepresentation. This was no longer a family dispute. This was a financial story that could end in handcuffs. I sat back in my chair and let the information settle. I thought of the dinner table where Brian had smirked when my card declined. I thought of him showing the house listing to the family. I thought of the emails he had sent to neighbors. He wanted the world to believe I was unstable. He wanted financial institutions to freeze me out so he could move freely. Now the bank could see his fingerprints on a message that pretended to speak for professionals. Proof. Evidence. Not anger or emotion or accusation. Facts. Evan kept working at the code, breaking down the routing information to create a report suitable for a legal setting. I watched his fingers move across the keys and realized something strange. The world that had been so dark the night before had begun to sharpen at the edges. The tunnel was still there, but now there were lights. Ruth suggested we submit the email as supplemental evidence to the motion. Evan said he would write a technical declaration explaining how he traced it. The court would not care about feelings. It would care about chain of custody. It would care about timestamps. It would care about the truth sealed inside the data. When I left the coffee shop, I drove to the Pentagon parking lot and sat in view of the building I had once walked into with a badge that carried more weight than any credit card or deed. I remembered briefings where the stakes were measured in lives, not mortgages. And I realized something. I had been fighting this battle like a daughter begging her family to see her. I needed to fight it like an officer who had seen how quickly a false narrative can destroy someone. I whispered the word again. No. No to silence. No to erasure. No to the lie of being unstable. No to the shame they wanted to wrap around my neck. Then I opened my email and wrote to Ruth. I told her we would not settle. We would not negotiate quietly. We would not let them walk away. We would see this through in open court. She replied with a single sentence, "Then we prepare for trial." That night, I received the first deed alert. Someone had tried to request a title update. The alert was not dramatic. It was a simple email, but I knew what it meant. They had tried to move a piece of the puzzle again. They had tried to make one more edit behind closed doors, and the system had told on them. The boulder they had pushed uphill for months suddenly rolled back. They did not know it yet, but the game had changed. I was not asking anymore. I was telling. The Arlington County Circuit Court smelled of old wood and cold air, the kind of place where truth is supposed to sit higher than ego. I walked through the doors with Ruth at my side and felt every stare land on me, like judgment already cast. The rows of benches were filled with neighbors, retirees, distant relatives, and curious strangers who had heard rumors about a homeless veteran causing trouble. The clerk called the case, and the judge took his seat with the authority of someone who had been sorting lies from facts for decades. Ruth stood and began with patience, presenting the first board of signatures, the original codicil bearing my grandfather's shaky handwriting, then the codicil submitted by my family 8 weeks ago. The contrast was unmistakable. The original had uneven strokes and the slight tremor of age. The new one had factory-perfect curves and a smoothness that no living hand could produce. There were murmurs in the gallery as Ruth explained the notary discipline history, the suspension in Richmond, the coincidence of dates, the wire transfers that lined up with each signature, and the escrow memo that suggested unusual urgency. When she finished, she placed the documents on the evidence table. The judge looked at them without expression, but his eyes did not move lightly. Then came the moment Lena had been waiting for. She rose with a kind of theatrical confidence and announced for the room to hear that they had done what was best for the family that I had chosen to leave, that I was unstable after deployment and incapable of managing a home, that I was just a homeless vet grasping for attention. A couple of people in the back laughed under their breath. Someone coughed in that awkward way people do when they want to hide amusement. My mother looked at her hands, and Carl crossed his arms and leaned back like he was watching a television drama. I felt the shards of humiliation press into my ribs, but this time there was no collapse. I stood. I looked at the judge and spoke one sentence, my voice steady enough to cut through the room. "You forged family to fund maintenance." It was a simple sentence, and the simplicity made it cruel. Brian flinched, barely noticeable. But Ruth saw it. The judge asked Ruth to continue, and she lifted a printed chart, a clean diagram of the wire transfers, every dollar labeled and each vendor listed. The courtroom quieted. This was what people understood: numbers, invoices, accounts. This was a story, financial, written in a language older than betrayal. Ruth narrated the flow from the care fund meant for my mother to the escrow account to Brian's marketing LLC. She showed the dates and the amounts and the memo lines. She used plain words, the kind that sink into the mind of every person who has ever paid a bill or feared a late fee. I watched the faces of the gallery change. Curiosity shifted into unease. Unease became suspicion. Suspicion became judgment, and it was not pointed at me. It was pointed at them. That was the power of public exposure. People do not need to be told whom to believe when numbers tell the story. While Ruth presented the last invoice, I opened my phone and submitted a lien notice through the county portal. It was a temporary filing, a polite legal flag, stating that I had a potential financial claim for the support I had once given my mother. It did not seize anything. It simply warned that the property could not move without acknowledging my stake. Mini payback does not need fireworks. Sometimes it is a clerk, somewhere adding a note to a file. When the defense attorney tried to shift the narrative to my supposed instability, Ruth handed the judge a folder containing the email. Evan traced the spoofed message pretending to be from a doctor. The judge read it, and his face did not change, but he tapped the document twice with his index finger. That was the sound of credibility shifting. When the hearing broke for a short recess, Brian stood from the table, chest puffed like he was going to reclaim control. But control does not return to people who lose it in public. When the judge came back to the bench, he asked a question that made the entire room still. Is there any reason the court should not consider a forensic document examination? The defense attorney hesitated. That silence was long enough. Before the attorney could answer, the bailiff stepped forward from the side door and handed the judge a sealed envelope. The judge slid it open with a letter opener and scanned the page. Then he read aloud. The Land Office has ordered a temporary freeze on all transfers related to the property in question pending forensic review. There was a collective inhale from the gallery. The defense attorney stiffened. Lena reached for Brian's hand. Carl leaned forward like someone had kicked the table. The escalated twist had arrived quietly, not with outrage, but with procedure. The judge placed the paper next to the evidence board and looked at me. His words were not dramatic. They did not need to be. Until further review, no sale, transfer, or refinancing of this estate will proceed. The sentence was a gavel without being a gavel. It was a door closing on their plans. The courtroom remained silent. Even the people who had laughed earlier now watched with the heavy interest of witnesses who realize they have judged too soon. I could feel the shift. The humiliation had changed direction. The story the family built about me had cracked under the weight of evidence. The court clerk stamped the order, and the sound was perfect, sharp and final. The judge set a date for the full evidentiary hearing, instructed both parties to prepare additional records, and adjourned. When he stood, the room rose. Lena tried to keep her chin lifted, but her eyes would not hold steady. Brian looked down at his shoes. My mother wiped her eyes, but did not speak. I walked out slowly, not triumphant, not smug, simply steady. Outside the courthouse door, a woman I had never seen before, maybe in her 60s, touched my sleeve. She said softly, "They thought you were small. You are not." I nodded once. The air outside felt lighter. Public exposure had begun, and it had done its work. The stage was set for the second act, the one where lies meet consequences, and the story stops being a family dispute and becomes a matter of law. The second day in court felt sharper, as if the air itself was waiting for something. The gallery filled earlier than usual, people whispering in clusters, trying to piece together what they thought they knew. When the bailiff called the room to order, the judge entered robe, moving with slow authority, and we resumed with the kind of tension that makes every throat dry. Ruth presented the forensic updates, the first confirmations that signatures showed, concerning patterns the kind that no reputable notary would touch. The defense tried to pivot back to character, but the judge waved it aside. He wanted facts, not gossip. Then the clerk announced a name that made every head lift, Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Keene. The title alone carried weight, and when he stepped through the doors in service uniform, the room stilled. Keene was tall silver at his temples, the kind of man who had spent a lifetime standing straight. He was present under subpoena, and also as amicus, though he made clear he was not there to disclose classified information. The mere fact of his presence shifted the balance. He walked to the front and faced the judge with the quiet respect of one who understood what institutions mean. The judge asked him to state his role. He did so plainly. Joint Chiefs Liaison assigned to oversight coordination and interagency support. Then came the question that tightened the room. Did he have knowledge of my service? He replied, carefully observing operational security. He said that my work in military intelligence at Joint Task Force operations had been reviewed at high levels, that I received commendations for intelligence synthesis that directly supported mission outcomes, and that a designation known as Raven 6 existed within internal frameworks to track specialized roles in analysis fusion. He did not embellish. He did not dramatize. He simply confirmed the truth under oath. The gallery did not move. The judge listened without blinking. My family stared as if someone had flipped the lights on in a room where they had been hiding. Keene continued stating that the Department of Defense Inspector General had previously consulted with my unit regarding fraud frameworks in contractor environments. He did not accuse anyone, but the implication was powerful. The idea that the person they had framed as unstable had once helped build the tools that detect fraud was not lost on the room. The defense attorney attempted to minimize it, asking if any classified details could be disclosed. Keene said no, and reminded the court that national security protocols did not permit specific mission information. But his presence was enough. The judge leaned forward slightly and spoke the line that changed everything. Bailiff locked the doors. The command landed with clean precision. The bailiff moved to secure the room, and the gallery seemed to shrink under the weight of it. The defense attorney looked rattled, and Brian's posture collapsed. Lena's confidence bled out of her face. My mother closed her eyes. When Keene stepped back, Ruth approached the bench and submitted the printed chain that Evan had prepared. Dates, times, routing metadata. It was a silent parade of facts that made the rumor narrative crumble. While the room processed the shift, the judge called a brief recess. People stood in small groups, whispering faster, now no longer amused. I stepped into the hall and pulled out my phone. A small act waited one more slice of quiet justice. Brian had been an authorized user on a credit card I opened long ago, back when I was home between deployments and trying to make family life easier. I called the issuer, verified my identity, and removed him permanently. The supervisor explained that it would change the utilization rate and could affect his credit. I thanked her politely. When I hung up, I imagined Brian checking his score weeks later and finding it lower, not knowing why, thinking the world had tilted against him. Sometimes revenge is not loud. Sometimes it is a simple removal of privilege. When the recess ended, we returned to the courtroom where a new email sat printed on the judge's bench. The second buyer for the house had withdrawn their offer, citing heightened legal risk. That meant no sale, no escrow completion, no refinance. Reddick Family LLC was frozen in place, lines of credit stretching thin, the pressure mounting by the hour. It was the escalated twist nobody expected to happen so fast. The defense attorney tried to argue that buyers get nervous for unrelated reasons, but the timing was too sharp. The judge looked at Brian and asked why his LLC had received maintenance payments. Brian stumbled over his answer. Lena tried to jump in, but the judge silenced her with a raised hand. The order had been given. The doors were locked. There was no running from the truth stitched into each document. The gallery leaned forward, hungry for every detail. People who once believed the rumors now saw the architecture of deception. The judge asked a question about the notary suspension. Ruth handed him the certification directly from Richmond, showing the date the notary lost standing. It lined up perfectly with the codicil. The courtroom had become a map, every landmark pointing at the same place: lies, money, intent. When Keene left the stand, he paused only long enough to nod at the judge. He did not look at my family. He did not have to. His presence had already rewritten the narrative. The judge turned to both tables and announced that full forensic review would proceed immediately. He emphasized the seriousness of the allegations and reminded everyone that the court would not tolerate attempts to influence banks with fabricated medical claims. The gallery inhaled as one realizing that the rumor about me being unstable now sounded like a weapon, not a concern. I sat with my hands folded and felt a strange calm settle over me. The truth had a pulse, and everyone could hear it. The judge adjourned, and as people stood to leave, I caught a glimpse of Brian's face. Panic had replaced arrogance. Lena whispered fast and frantic. Carl rubbed his forehead. My mother looked at me with a kind of quiet fear, not of me, but of the truth she could no longer deny. Outside the courthouse, the air was cold, but it felt like oxygen after weeks underwater. Strangers walked past with murmurs of sympathy instead of suspicion. Justice had taken its first full breath, and there was still more to come. The next hearing moved faster than anyone expected, and the courtroom felt different, quieter, heavier, as if everyone could sense that the story had crossed from family drama into something sharper. The judge entered, reviewed the filings, and issued a temporary order that froze the assets inside the family trust and barred any sale, refinance, or transfer until the forensic examination was complete. He instructed the clerk to forward the file to the Commonwealth's attorney for review of potential forgery and fraud, and the words landed like a door slamming shut. Carl's jaw tightened. Brian's fingers twitched against the table. Lena stared at the judge as though she did not understand how the world had turned. The gallery leaned forward, hungry for every crack. When court adjourned, the hallway outside became a battlefield of whispers. Carl rounded on Brian, voice low and sharp, blaming him for pulling Avery into this mess, saying if he had not gotten greedy, the house would have sold, and none of this would have happened. Brian snapped back, accusing Carl of panicking, insisting the judge had no proof yet. Their lawyer tried to quiet them, but panic had a pulse. Lena stood a few feet away, tears streaking her makeup, and she looked at me with a mixture of rage and desperation. She called me cruel. She said I was heartless, that I was tearing the family apart, that I had forgotten what loyalty meant. Her voice cracked on the word loyalty, a word she never understood. I did not answer her. I simply watched the pieces crumble. The money pressure began to grind immediately. Their lawyer fees climbed by the hour, the refinance they depended on sat frozen, and the interest on the short-term loan they had taken out to stage, the house came due. For people who spent their lives counting on other people's silence, debt was louder than conscience. Later that afternoon, I sat in my car, opened my bank app, and went through every supplemental card connected to my account. The old cards I had once given the family for travel emergencies and groceries were still active. I filed chargeback requests for every unauthorized transaction from the past weeks and revoked every user. Then I called the phone carrier and shut down the lines that were still attached to my name. Within minutes, their phones lost signal. They would have to pay deposits to restart service under their own credit scores, and the thought of them staring at blank screens made a quiet part of me exhale. Mini payback does not need shouting. Sometimes it is silence in the form of a disconnected phone. The next morning, Ruth called with another update. The bank had mailed a notice stating that a secondary account under my mother's name was now on hold due to an ongoing power of attorney dispute. The letter implied a concern about who had authority to move funds. The implication was a crack that widened with every hour. Money that had flowed freely through their fingers was now stuck in place, and every stuck dollar felt like a hand closing slowly around their plans. I imagined them gathered at the kitchen table, phones, dead bank accounts, freezing lawyer bills stacking, trying to understand how everything slipped. Brian would be pacing, checking his email, confused why the second buyer backed out. Carl would be muttering about the judge overstepping. Lena would be calling relatives to tell her side, but without a phone line, there was no one to hear her. Their world had thrived on access, on the ease of pressing buttons and shifting money. Now every button met a locked gate. When people who are used to taking run out of places to take from, they turn on each other. Carl accused Brian of forging signatures. Brian accused Carl of signing off on the payments. Lena said they should have left the house alone and taken my savings instead. Their lawyer told them to calm down, but panic is not logical. In the courtroom, they still tried to look composed, but outside the doors, their patience shattered. While they unraveled, the Commonwealth's attorney sent a request to Ruth for additional files. The investigation was now official. It was no longer about family anger. It was about the state examining the possibility of a felony. When I returned to my apartment that evening, I sat at the table where my laptop and stacks of printed evidence lay waiting. I touched the edges of the pages and wondered how many families dissolve without anything ever coming to light. How many people accept humiliation because they think they are alone. The quiet in my apartment was not the emptiness of silence. It was the calm that follows a storm. In the following days, the pressure increased. The bank placed a fraud monitoring hold on the escrow account and requested clarification from the notary's office. The title company demanded statements from everyone who had signed or submitted documents. Vendors who had been paid from the maintenance line asked why they were being contacted by investigators. The world tightened around the people who once felt untouchable. The worst part for them was not the legal pressure. It was the uncertainty. They could not predict what the next letter would say, or which agency would call, or who might testify. When people rely on deception as a foundation, they do not know how to stand when the ground becomes honest. Lena called my mother crying, asking her to beg me to stop. My mother called me, voice trembling, pleading for mercy. I listened, but did not bend. Mercy without accountability is just permission to repeat the crime. That night, I sat outside on a bench in Crystal City watching planes approach Reagan National Lights, descending over the river in long glides. I thought about the years I spent believing loyalty meant silence. Now I knew that loyalty to the truth mattered more. The brake run of a roller coaster is the part where speed becomes consequence, where the thrill sharpens into fear. They were feeling it now. The story was no longer about me trying to prove my worth. The story was about them proving their guilt with every frantic move. And the final drop had not even hit yet. The final hearing began with the same ritual as every other day in court, the bailiff calling the room to order the judge taking his seat, the gallery settling into rows of heavy silence. But something had changed. The case no longer felt like a question. It felt like an answer waiting to be spoken aloud. The judge reviewed the forensic reports, the signature analysis, the notary suspension records, the vendor payments, the bank alerts, the spoofed email, and the escrow memos. Each page was another nail in a coffin, built out of arrogance. When he spoke, his tone was steady and unshakable. The court finds that the transfer of the estate is void. Restitution in part will be ordered to the plaintiff. Carl Reddick, Brian Calloway, and Lena Reddick are hereby prohibited from taking any action involving the property or the trust. Furthermore, this court recommends referral to the Commonwealth's attorney for review of potential forgery and financial fraud. The words fell into the room with the weight of stone. My mother buried her face in her hands. Carl stared forward as if trying to understand how law worked, only when someone enforced it. Brian blinked empty of his usual smirk. Lena let out a tiny gasp like the floor had moved under her. For the first time since stepping into this war, I felt the world stop spinning. I did not smile. I did not celebrate. I only breathed. After court, I walked toward the exit and heard footsteps behind me. Brian called my name, his voice stripped of pride. He asked if we could speak privately. He told me there was a way to repay everything without destroying the family. He said we could settle quietly, that no one needed to know how bad things had gotten. He said there were deals to make. That was the audacity return the moment the person who tried to erase you comes back when they realize you are the one holding the light. I did not turn around. I spoke with a calm that surprised even me. Everything goes through counsel. I kept walking. Outside, the autumn air felt cleaner. The courthouse steps were still warm from the afternoon sun. People passed by with coffees and briefcases and conversations that had nothing to do with betrayal. I stood at the bottom of the steps and looked toward Falls Church, the house that had started all this. Weeks later, after the title was fully cleared and the legal knots were untangled, the estate returned to my name. I did not repaint the walls or change the floors. Instead, I contacted a foundation that helped female veterans rebuild their lives. We turned the house into a resource center, a place where women coming home could find a job, placement office, a quiet room to study a kitchen that smelled like food instead of paperwork. I kept one room as a reading space lined with books and a desk where someone could write a resume or a letter or maybe their own story. Some nights, I sat there alone listening to the hum of the thermostat and feeling the peace that comes when a house no longer hides lies. The money angle had come full circle. The estate that greed tried to steal was now helping women who had no one fighting for them. Sometimes justice looks like a courtroom. Sometimes justice looks like a room with a lamp and a stack of job applications waiting to be filled. Word of the case spread quietly through the veteran community. People stopped me in parking lots or grocery stores or on the sidewalk telling me they had followed the news, telling me they understood what betrayal felt like, telling me they were proud I did not bend. One evening, Evan stopped by with takeout and asked if I had ever told anyone what Raven 6 really meant. I shook my head. The name was never given to make someone important. It was given because someone had to keep track of every detail, every footprint, every signature, every clue. Raven 6 was not about noise. It was about never missing the trace of a lie. That night, I walked to the edge of the Potomac, where the river moves beneath the glow of Crystal City's lights. Planes floated in toward Reagan National like slow-moving stars. The wind was cold, but it did not sting. I realized that home is not four walls or a deed. Home is the truth you refuse to bury. I stood there in the quiet and let the world settle. The story that began with humiliation ended with clarity. They had called me a homeless vet, a burden and embarrassment. They had tried to erase me. But the more they tried to erase me, the more visible the truth became. The more they tried to silence me, the louder the evidence spoke. I walked back toward the city lights with a steady step. I did not feel triumphant. I felt whole. The last line of the story remained unspoken, held inside my chest like a quiet promise. If someone tries to take your voice, use paper. If someone tries to bury the truth, dig. And if someone tries to convince you that you are small, remember that the law is written in ink, and ink leaves traces. If this touched you, drop. I am still here. This is quiet justice and silent revenge, emotional resilience, dignity over money, truth, and closure. Keep standing up for yourself. Reclaiming respect is a lesson in betrayal justice without hate, revenge through truth.